going on, guys? How's it going, man? Hello, Blanca. What's playing in the background? Collie Buds on a Sonos speaker. Not bad. Not bad. Not bad at all. Got 5 people. Cool. Numbers are building. Next week, folks, Thanksgiving. Make sure that you are on top of your stuff, man. Because, like I said, once we come back from Thanksgiving, that's all she wrote, man. Hopefully you guys are on top of it. Quick poll. Anything I can do for some extra credit? No. Quick poll. How many people? Well, let me put it this way. If Hancock goes back next semester and we're remote learning again, right? So not on campus. How many people plan on not enrolling in school? If you're someone who you don't want to do this again, just tell me here in the comment section. Trying to get a feel. Enrollment was down this fall, and typically in the fall, that's when the numbers are really high. So I'm just wondering kind of how enrollment's going to go in the spring. I mean, obviously, I'm sure most of the numbers are bad. You've already enrolled. Okay. That's good. I'm not discouraging people at all by any stretch of the imagination, but spring enrollment is typically lower than fall enrollment year in and year out at most community colleges, not colleges in general, not just Hancock. What's going on, Edgar and Laura? Hi. So I'm just curious, Sean, what's going on? I don't know. We'll see how it goes. It's not looking good right now, and I have a feeling we're gonna see some lower numbers this semester at Hancock, or this spring at Hancock. But we'll see how it goes. Sounds like everyone's going to go back to school or has plans of going back to school, regardless if we're remote or not. That's good. That's a good thing. While we're waiting another minute or so, open up your Canvas to atherosclerosis, if you can, please and thank you. I gotta turn this music off too. It's a distraction. Give me 1 second here. Okay. Come on. Move this around. All right. Okay. All right. So cardiovascular disease in its many forms. Obviously, heart damage, arterial damage, valve damage, all of cardiovascular disease, at the heart of it is what we call atherosclerosis, and that's actually a term that literally means the hardening of the arteries. And ultimately, if we look at the artery itself, if we look at the tissue itself, it's a very pliable, very functional tissue. Obviously, it can expand and contract as our oxygen, our needs increase. The the artery itself have the ability to expand. They obviously, when we get back to our resting heart rate, or we need less oxygen, less blood flow, they can contract. And if you were to fillet an artery and take a microscope to the surface of the artery, what you would find is billions and billions of endothelial cells. Those cells are ultimately responsible for blood being able to flow through them. They produce a nitric gas that allows the blood to continue to flow smoothly. When we have atherosclerosis, what we have is that buildup of that LDL, right? Low density lipoprotein, that fatty kind of wax-like substance that wants to build up in the arteries. And what more and more recent studies are indicating that one of the main culprits of cardiovascular disease is just simply inflammation. In other words, we consume foods that are highly processed foods, hydrogenated oils, grains, breads, things of that nature, cookies, crackers, things that have been cooked at such a high temperature that the food structure is changed, it's bastardized, your body doesn't recognize it as food. And what we find is that inflammation, when we trigger it over and over and over again, an acute response, right? Acute means short in duration, immediate and short in duration. But if we're triggering that inflammation over and over again with a poor diet and with a lack of exercise, what we're doing is we're turning acute inflammation into chronic inflammation. And it's evident by the amount of cardiovascular disease that we have in America. And ironically, it's also closely aligned to type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes essentially does the same thing as cardiovascular disease. It restricts blood flow. When we have a restriction of blood flow, we have a loss of neurological function. We have a loss of muscular function. We have certain tissues, like in the extremities, like your hands and your feet are very susceptible to disease. People who have type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease often have ocular degeneration. And that's just because the inflammation, it gets built up, those endothelial cells become scarred and they peel up, just like any other form of inflammation. And when we were in our sex health unit, we talked about gonorrhea and how gonorrhea can cause inflammatory damage to the fallopian tubes in females. It's the same type of inflammation. Literally it is. It's coming from a different source, but inflammation is inflammation. So what happens is those endothelial cells become scarred and rigid, and they actually start to peel up. So now as that LDL travels through, it has something to kind of latch onto, right? So that's kind of why one of the things in the back of my mind when I'm telling you eating fat doesn't necessarily make you fat. Eating highly processed foods and fat will make you fat. But ultimately, what we're doing mainly is we're just consuming way too many calories for the most part, but the wrong calories, right? The wrong calories. There is a term called digestive glucocytosis. I'm sure I spelled that right. Sorry. Digestive leukocytosis. There we go. Okay. Digestive leukocytosis, that is an inflammatory response upon the consumption of food, which isn't something to necessarily get freaked out about. But again, just think what you're doing to your body when you are constantly bombarding it with processed foods, right? We talked a little bit about the pancreas last week, and we'll talk a little bit about it more in the coming days, but or in the coming weeks. But the pancreas is in charge of producing insulin. Insulin is the hormone. It's actually, it's kind of serves as a catalyst. It's a hormone that allows us to essentially use sugar as fuel, right? And what we're finding more and more is people, the term is insulin resistant. We're finding people who aren't producing enough insulin. The insulin is damaged. It doesn't necessarily work that well, or it doesn't work well at all. And the fact that they still have just extremely high blood sugar. These are all kind of ultimately of the same result, right? And that's a decision that you make every day to kind of choose the sweet food, the easy food, the packaged food, choose the food of convenience, right? And it's catching up to us a little bit. So looking at this this graphic here, you begin to see that, the endothelial dysfunction is ultimately because that scarring takes place on the surface of the endothelial cell. It can no longer produce that gas. We lose the pliability. The waxy substance builds up in the artery. The artery becomes hardened, and there you have a heart attack, right? That's exactly what a bypass is. A bypass is bypassing that damaged part of the artery. And I'm sure you've heard of people, or maybe even know someone who's had bypass surgery, right? Triple bypass surgery. Very, very common these days. So if we click over to our next page here, right, which is entitled cardiovascular disease. Let me make sure I got the right one. One second. Okay, so if we flip over to our page entitled CVD, right, there are a couple of 5 or 6 different types of cardiovascular disease. Yes, I got you, Maria. There's a couple different cardiovascular types of cardiovascular disease there, but they're essentially all very similar. I mean, a stroke is just a blockage or a breakage in the brain. A heart attack is just a blockage or breakage in the brain. Congestive heart failure, coronary artery disease, all of these are just blockages or breakages in the bloodstream. And it's something that really can be avoided, right? So how do we avoid it? We get back to some of those monounsaturated fats that we talked about. Get a little bit more plant food. It really doesn't have much to do with the amount of meat you consume or the amount of fat you consume. As a matter of fact, there are people who have diets as high as 50-60% of their caloric consumption is in fat, but they're not taking in any carbohydrate, right? So the devil is in the details, right? You need to kind of start looking at your diet a little bit and get, I think I've mentioned it before, but try to find like a 30-30-30 ratio. In other words, every time you eat, you're going to consume not just a protein and a carbohydrate, or not just a fat and a carbohydrate. You're going to consume a protein, a fat, and a carbohydrate. And the idea behind that is maybe the protein and the fat get upped a little bit and start replacing some of the carbohydrate calories. That's probably the easiest way to make a good change in your diet and avoid the downfalls of consuming too much carbohydrate. So like if you're looking at dinner, let's say mom made, chicken, rice, and salad, and you go for some chicken, you go for 2 scoops of rice, and you just you do a little bit of salad. We should probably flip that, right? We should probably have a salad that takes a third of the plate, meat that takes a third of the plate, obviously depending on what kind of meat you're eating, and diminish or at least scale down the amount of carbohydrate that you're eating. Just doing that alone, making sure that you're balancing out your diet with those fat and protein. They give you a fuller feeling. They help satiate you. In other words, you feel fuller longer. And the other thing is you simply, when you diminish or when you lower the amount of carbohydrate that you're taking in, what you're actually doing is you're bringing that metabolism back in line. So you consume something high in sugar, your blood sugar goes up. We all know simple sugars, particularly simple sugars, aren't good for us in the long term. In other words, they have a tendency to peak about 30, 40 minutes after consumption, and then your metabolism starts to drop. So we talked about what happens in weight gain. A lot of people who gain weight are people who are consuming large calories and then not consuming anything, consuming large amount of calories and not consuming anything. And their metabolism is kind of doing this. It's up and down, up and down. And your body just goes into fat storage mode that way. So by consuming more protein, consuming more fat, consuming less carbohydrate, what we're doing is we're minimizing those lows and highs. We're steadying our metabolism. And that's ultimately what you should do. It takes calories to burn calories. So we want to get up, we want to do something. It doesn't have to be anything hard. Doesn't even have to necessarily be anything physical. I mean, simply getting up and taking the time to stretch out your legs, stretch out your lower back. That's a great digestive aid. Drink a glass of water, get going, maybe have a cup of coffee, but not too long after you get up. You're going to start consuming your first, 300-400 calories for the day. And just like we talked about at the beginning of this unit, we get away from eating once, not eating for a long time, eating maybe just 2 times during the day or 3 times during the day. No. We got to up that. We got to up that big time. We got to go 4 or 5 meals a day. I mean, you can even go as high as 7. We're looking about 300-400 calories each one. And every time we eat something, we're going to consume a protein, a fat, and a carbohydrate, right? We are never, ever, 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 if you live by this rule, to never put just a carbohydrate in your body, right? If you live by that rule alone, I think most of you would probably be able to keep your weight in check, right? Because ultimately it's the processed foods that's causing the inflammation. Ultimately, it's the processed foods that is causing insulin resistance. Ultimately, it's the processed food that is packing weight around your waistline, right? And the bottom line is, the older you get, the more weight you have, the higher chances you have for all diseases, not just cardiovascular disease, but cancer, prostate issues, incontinence, not being able to get an erection. Those are all correlated to cardiovascular health. Even dementia. Dementia is plaque buildup in the brain, the same plaque that builds up on the arterial walls, just in the brain. So, I know people who have dementia, and it's because they have buildup in the brain. There's less blood flow to the brain, and you see what happens to them. Same things happens. Diabetics, they cut their finger, it doesn't heal that well. Sometimes, not sometimes, a lot of times, people who are type 2 diabetic for long periods of time, they have to have limbs amputated because they're not getting blood to them, right? So anyways, I'm rambling a little bit, but I wanted to give you your assignment. So what you're going to do, you're going to Google, pick one of the forms of CBD, right? So on the page that says many forms of CBD, okay? You're going to pick that. You're going to get that page. You're going to pick one. I want you to define it. List its symptoms and list how to avoid it. And to be completely honest with you, what you're really listening is how to avoid cardiovascular disease. And you know most of that. Diet high in fiber, reasonable diet, staying within, it's okay, Monica. Staying within your daily caloric intake. Again, women, roughly 2,000 calories, men, roughly 2,500 calories. Making sure you get exercise, making sure you stay hydrated. I mean, you know most of those answers. Okay, so your lecture question tonight is, look at the page, many forms of cardiovascular disease. Pick one of them. Let's say coronary artery disease. That's the one that kind of caught my eye. Define it, list its symptoms, and give a brief description on how to avoid it. Right? That's all you really got to do. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. Any questions? Yeah? No? Maybe so? I don't know about you, but I'm ready to wrap this semester up. Wrap her up, have Thanksgiving, have Christmas, chill out, let the COVID blow through, hopefully. Not take anyone down, and go back to normal life. Okay? If you have any questions, shoot me an email. You have your lecture question. You have your other assignments. Make sure you stay on top of your stuff. And deuces, I'll see you in a week.